Okay, we are here to discuss the PILIAVIN et al. Study from 1969, also known as the Subway Samaritans study, which studies if people are more or less likely to help in a public situation. Of the 12 studies in the new syllabus, the 9990 syllabus, this is one of the least requested ones for some sort of online assistance. And I think part of the reason is that I think most people get the general ideas of what's being studied. However, keep in mind there are several IVs, several DVs, and that with only 12 studies on the syllabus for a whole year, there's a certain depth of the study that is expected from students. And in the past, when there were more studies in the psychology syllabi for Cambridge, I think most teachers would say, don't worry too much about the primary sources, worry more about the secondary ones in the textbooks. However, I think this one is easily available on the internet, and take a look at it if you have the time. But let's start off with a phrase we need to understand one of the general ideas of the study, and that phrase is diffusion. If you've studied chemistry or physics in the past, you probably have seen this word before. Diffusion, in a simplified way, just means the spread or the separation of particles. What does that have to do with psychology? Well, if you put it in the phrase diffusion of responsibility, it essentially means that the responsibility for a given incident is spread across the people, where people are sort of paralyzed whether or not they should help in a situation. So an example of this would be a person who's sort of begging or in crisis in a city street, and you think, well, there's so many people around, maybe it's not up to me to do it. Maybe there's somebody with more ability or some sort of medical background who could do a better job than I can. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that there's so many people around, it's believed that nobody acts, sort of like a mob mentality of inaction. Now, the term or the title of the study is Good Samaritanism, an Underground Phenomenon, which is sort of a play on words because it's going to be taking place in a subway, also known as an underground. But please keep in mind it's a subway because it's this New York City, not England. So that's the common phrase for the underground transport. Anyway, it comes from the Bible. The Good Samaritan, if you don't know the parable, is about a person who was accosted on a road. He was, I believe, robbed and severely injured. And many people passed him by, including some holy people. And despite their sense of righteousness, would still pass him by without giving him any help. However, it was a Samaritan who helped out this person. And when Jesus was telling this story in the New Testament, essentially the listeners would have heard the word Samaritan as a person that they would not usually get along with. So it shows you how people of different backgrounds could still be empathetic to each other. So, the Samaritan housed him and cleaned up his wounds and gave him money and food and things like that. So it's a classic of good social behavior. So that's why it's called the Good Samaritanism study. And there have been several studies like this, studying Samaritanism. But this one here was particularly sparked by the murder of Kitty Genovese, or I've heard it pronounced Genovese or Genovese. This was published in the New York Times as well as other New York newspapers, that 38 people who saw the murder of this woman outside their apartment in Queens, despite seeing it and hearing her cry for help, did not call the police or any sort of attention for her rescue. They didn't come out and rescue her themselves, and she was stabbed several times. I believe the perpetrator walked away for a few minutes at one point, and he even came back. So there was plenty of time to intervene with the situation, but nobody intervened. There has been some rewriting of the history of this case with a new documentary that came out that claimed that several of the people tried to reach out, or that back in 1960, what was it, 64, 63 or so, they didn't have the easy access to 911 that we have today. 911 was not a shorthand for calling the police. So does that legitimize them not intervening? Probably not, but there is some reason to believe they weren't as callous as we make it out to seem. If you want to check out that 2016 documentary, I believe it's called Witness, and it sort of re-examines the Kitty Genovese murder. But this did a good thing. I hate to say it. Sometimes tragedy prevents other tragedy, in that it changed the way that the 911 system works in New York, and it also called to attention mob mentality when it comes to distressing situations. And it also set alight a bunch of psychologists who wanted to now study this diffusion of responsibility phenomenon. Okay, two of these psychologists were Darley and Latane, and they ran several simulations of emergencies to see how people would react if they were among other people or by themselves. So you see here, they mention a 1968 study that is about an epileptic seizure heard over earphones, sort of like a, what do you call those people who have headphones, some sort of call receptionist who hears a person going through some sort of distressing physiological problem, such as a seizure, and if they believe they were the only person on the line helping the person, then they would definitely call for help. However, if they were believed to be on the phone with the person and there were other people who were also on the line, they were less likely, or they would hesitate in calling for help. An easier way is to show a follow-up study that Darley and Latane did, which was to show smoke coming or billowing under a door while a person is doing some sort of menial task. And if the person is by himself, he's like, hey, wait a second, something funny's happening, I better tell somebody. But if the person's put in a room with two actors who don't act like they care a bit, then they will also go along with what the majority are doing. This sort of reminds us of the Solomon Asch conformity studies as well, which also is a classic in social psychology. So in short, Darley and Latane established that this phenomenon that was coined diffusion of responsibility does indeed exist. Another way of calling this phenomenon is the bystander effect. And there are several clips on YouTube that you could watch about the bystander effect. You watch, but you don't intervene. All right, and that's just some classwork. And like I said before, there is a movie called Witness if you want to know more about the background of this study with the murder of Kitty Genovese. Another study that is mentioned in the background is a study by Bryan and Test, where they ran a series of experiments to study the effects of modeling on altruism. So in this case, rather than just having people ignore a problem, we see what happens in one situation if there is a model helping or there is not a model helping. And the results were, I guess as expected, significantly more people stopped to help a woman on the road with a flat tire if there was somebody else helping her with the flat tire on the shoulder of the road. If she was just by herself, however, more cars tended to just pass right on by. It's kind of startling that humans are given to social pressures when it comes to altruistic behavior, but there's time and time again evidence that people are more likely to ignore someone in need of help if there's no one around and if there's no model. So again, this is just background stuff. Let's get to the actual study itself. Can we replicate these kind of findings for diffusion of responsibility on a subway car? So the aim of this study is to test diffusion of responsibility on a subway car, see if this hypothesis will hold true in New York City. And that's actually quite important because remember, the murder of Kitty Genovese happened in Queens, New York. So our target population could just be people of New York. We don't have to worry too much about generalizability here because this was sparked by a New York incident. But while we're doing this, we might as well throw in some other IVs. So let's see if race will have an effect on whether people are willing to help or not. And just like with the tire study by Bryan and Test, let's see if the effect of a model will encourage other people to help. So let's break this down by IVs and DVs. So IV1 will be the victim who falls on the ground. All right, he will fall by the pole in the critical area of the subway car. And we call this the critical area because this is where the major action is happening. And he will have one of two props with him. He'll have either a cane or a covered bottle to indicate maybe he's a drunk. So the type of victim will have data recorded if he's is perceived to be ill or perceived to be drunk. We're also going to have some different races, and black and white is the easiest way to break it down, especially in times in America where we think of race very simplistically. And the third thing will be modeling. Does a person help early or does a person help late? So does a person intervene with 70 seconds into the incident or 150 seconds into the incident? And just to make things more complex, we have 4 DVs. We're going to study the frequency of helping, okay, how many people are helping, the speed of helping, how many seconds it takes, the race of the helpers, how many black people help, how many white people help, and the sex of the helper. So there's a lot of things to keep track of, especially because this is a field study, and that can be quite chaotic. You can't control how many people are going to be on a subway car at once. So this is quite a challenge to keep track of all of these things. The setting, of course, is a New York City subway, but let's get more specific. We're going to study the A line and the D line, and why are we going to do this is because these two lines are running for 7.5 minutes between 59th Street and 125th Street. So we have a inescapable or seemingly inescapable situation. People can't just get off the car and relieve their anxiety about the situation. So this is a long express line. And we'll look here at the next slide at what the subway map looks like today, and actually was almost exactly the same in 1969. All right. So here is, for example, where the A and the D line converge, and you see those white dots. Those indicate express stops. Okay, so other trains are running on the same tracks, but these two skip the black dots in between. They're express, and it's running northward towards Harlem. Okay. It's amazing how very little has changed in New York compared to other cities. This is a tangent, but it's quite remarkable how old its infrastructure is, and there's even a Duke Ellington song singing about the A train, which heads all the way up to Harlem. All right, and that's kind of important too, because back in the 60s, Harlem was predominantly African American, so you want to make sure you have both white and African American passengers on your train. Now, around this time in New York, the subway system was changing over to a more streamlined seating structure where sort of like it was more like benches aligned against each wall, east wall, west wall. So here we're going to use old layouts, and I think part of the reason was as a control, but also because you are facing different directions. Maybe it's better for the observers to get a line of sight on what's happening in the other car. So I'll talk about the observers later, but there are 2 observers in the adjacent car, and there's the actor or stooge and the helper, the modeler, in the critical car. All right, so if you ever asked for controls in the study, you can mention they always made sure to use the old subway cars with 13 seats per car. Who are the participants? This is probably the most participants in any of the studies that we do this year. They were 4,450 passengers. That's a lot of tabulating there. And they were to approximately calculate that 45% were black, 55% were white. And of course, we're using an opportunity sample. None of these people have volunteered. None of these people probably even knew they were in a study. So they probably went their whole lives without even realizing they were partaking in a study. They were unsolicited. Could that cause ethical problems? Yeah, but I think they're acceptable ethical problems. They're not, the distress they feel is probably short-term rather than long-term. But unsolicited means you were not seeking out any sort of involvement in the study. All right, let's get to the procedure. Let's talk mostly about the stooge for now. The stooge would lie supine, which is another way of saying on his back, looking at the ceiling, and he would fall 70 seconds into the train ride. That'll be a crazy study. Anyway, until receiving help, he remained in that position, so that's maybe another control. And that might be important too, because you want to make sure that the people could see his face for several reasons. Maybe one, to identify easily what his race is, because that's a naive of the study, but also to make that human connection. This person is in some sort of state of help, right? It humanizes the victim. This drawing is not very good though, because he should be wearing what's called an Eisenhower jacket. An Eisenhower jacket doesn't mean a military jacket, despite the name. It just means a certain cut of the jacket, a certain style of the collar, the zipper, the sleeves, just like General Eisenhower wore in the Pacific Theater, I guess. I'm not sure exactly. Anyway, that being said, that is a control because we want to make sure he looks like he's from the same economic class. So there's no other, variables going on here that are encouraging people to help. And he wasn't wearing a tie. Maybe if he was wearing a tie, people would be more likely to help him because he looks like he's somebody from the upper crust. And like I said earlier, there's one of two props. Prop one is cane, which means I am physically disabled, or in this case, they would call it ill. Or he would have a paper bag over a bottle, which means I'm drunk. And, I don't know other cultures besides Western cultures, but if you see a bottle that is covered in the brown paper bag, that is a telltale sign that it's alcohol, because by some, law, you can't advertise the fact that you're drinking an alcoholic beverage to other people. Okay, so this stooge was played by 4 different people. Unfortunately, 3 of them were white and 1 was black. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But you might want to know they're from Columbia University. They were between the ages of 26 to 35. Like I said, they were dressed in Eisenhower jackets. And again, 3-to-1 white to black ratio. And one of the authors make the note that it's unfortunate from a design standpoint that there was only 1 black victim. But they explained that he was the only black student in the class from which our crews were recruited. So these were, I guess, psych students. And, in the 60s, equal opportunity is not what it is nearly today. So there was underrepresentation of black males in that class. Therefore, we only had 1 guy to go with. Now, this is, they've asked actually 1 year on a previous exam paper, why would this be a problem? Of course, usually when you talk about generalizability, you talk about the participants, not the stooge. But in this case, it does apply because can you generalize based on just 1 black male? What if he has other features that would turn people on or off to his the ability to help him? Maybe he's extraordinarily handsome. Maybe he's got a weird nose. So it does cause a bit of a problem, not just with that, but with the amount of data that could be collected. So there's an uneven amount of data collected for the white condition and the black condition. All right, let's get to the observers. The observers were 2 females, and they sat in the same space if they can get that seat. And they're not looking at the same exact thing. Let me just read this here because I forget as well. The one sitting more towards the away from the critical area looked at the sex, race, location, and number of passengers in the adjacent area at the time the first help was offered. Sorry, am I reading that right? Number of passengers in the adjacent area and the time for the first help to be offered. That's okay, that's better. And the second one was looking at the other car for sex, race, location, and number of passengers in the critical area. So the one towards the back is actually doing the timekeeping, I believe. So even though they're looking at same phenomenon like sex, race, and location, they're looking in different cars for those 2 things. So if you ever write about this study about control, you might be tempted to talk about inter-rater reliability. But I'm going to tell you, please don't, a lot of students make this mistake, please don't say this study had inter-rater reliability, unlike a study like something like Bandora, where you have 2 people in the booth looking at the same thing, or I believe Schachter and Singer. So they're not looking at the same observed phenomenon. So this is not inter-rater reliability. Okay. All right, I just threw some past paper question here. If you want to look at it, you could pause it, but I will not discuss it in any detail. So if you don't want the answer spoiled, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's get to the results of this study. Lots of numbers, lots and lots of numbers. And the more numbers there are, the less likely I think you should remember them, because I think the reward for your effort is lower than looking at other aspects of a study. So I'll try to give you some abbreviated numbers, but in terms of just looking at the data as a whole, uh, you could take it upon yourself to look at this stuff. But as you can see, the frequency of helping is really quite high for all the conditions. They're all above 50%, with the obvious exception to the excellent results being the black victim who was drunk. And we'll come back to that later and talk about why that might be. But with no model, cane, drunk, white, white that was with the cane, white that was with the drunk, always got help. Black with the cane always got help. Black who appeared to be drunk sometimes would not be helped. So the frequency was quite high. Now, we said earlier we're looking for the phenomenon of diffusion of responsibility in the study, and we're not finding it. And this is one of the rare studies that show the thing we're looking for actually doesn't come true. So why is it in the textbook? Well, there are so many other things to look at besides just diffusion of responsibility. Now, why was there no diffusion of responsibility? Well, that's up to interpretation, but I would guess because unlike the Kitty Genovese murder, you are face to face with a person who just fell, and you're under some sort of social pressure to show other people that you're a good person. And we'll come back to that later. But for now, those are the numbers. For the second IV, we'll look at the speed of helping. Now, the one thing you should know about speed is that we need to operationalize two terms, spontaneous help and non-spontaneous help. Spontaneous help is considered to be help that was received within 70 seconds. And then after that, the model would step in. And then if it's up to, I believe, 150 seconds, then it's non-spontaneous help. I'm sorry, the 150 seconds was when the model had the late modeling condition. But most of the time, the modeling didn't matter because people jumped in before the model even had a chance to do anything. So one of our IVs, modeling versus non-modeling, doesn't even matter. Okay, so let me just say this again. So before 70 seconds, spontaneous help. After 70 seconds is not spontaneous help. But you had early modeling and you had late modeling, which complicates things even further. But let's just simplify this into numbers that are memorable. This was not presented as percentages in the primary source document. It was presented as just a fraction. So 62 out of 65 times for the cane would be spontaneous help, with the median time being 5 seconds. That's a number you totally could remember. 5 seconds, that's super quick, all right? The drunk people, however, got spontaneous help 50% of the time, and the median time was 109 seconds. So there's a huge, huge gap. It's the same person. The only thing that's different is the prop. So people are less likely to help a drunk people. Now, why is that? Well, there's something called the cost-reward matrix that we'll get to later. So for now, let's keep going with the results. The race. Unsurprisingly, one of the general conclusions is people of the same race are more likely to help each other, but it's not that drastic in all situations. So, for example, a white person is more likely to help a white person, or a white person helped a white person 68% of the time, black helping white 32, white helping black 50, black helping black 50. Now, this is just for first helpers. The numbers could be further complicated if you tabulate people who helped subsequently. All right. You could, I'm not going to stay here, but if you want to pause this, you could pause it. But just know that same race helping was more likely, at least in the case of white to white. All right, let's move on to gender. 60% of the people in the critical area were males. Yet, of the 81 spontaneous first helpers, 90% were males. So the number of first helpers is not representative of the breakdown of male to female on the train. So males were definitely more likely to help out. Now, there were several comments recorded as well that could shed some light on why this happened. So there was qualitative data. This is not just a quantitative study. And two of the comments that stick out to me were as follows. One woman said it's for men to help. And another woman said, I wish I could help him. I'm just not strong enough, or I'm not strong enough. So, by the way, these comments were more likely in the drunk condition. It's noted in the source text. That being said, or comments in general were more likely in the drunk condition. People were more likely to gossip in the drunk condition. That's not surprising. All right, so this is 1969. Please don't be offended by this notion. These women do not speak for perhaps the 21st century woman, but 1969 is a different period. It's almost a half a decade old. All right. Conclusions are easier than results. Always, always, always. Remember, conclusion is something that you could state in the present tense or the future tense, whereas a result is the past tense. So here are 5 conclusions that could be made. A person who appears drunk will receive less help than an ill person. I think that makes sense. Somebody would say, hey, it's his fault he's drunk. No big deal. Think about, like, do you feel bad for people who are dying of lung cancer who smoked their whole lives versus a 12-year-old girl with leukemia? We react differently to people's plight depending on what situation or how responsible they are for their own situation. All right, 2, men are more likely to help. Hooray, men. 3, same race helping is more likely. 4, there is no strong relationship between numbers of bystanders and the speed of helping. So again, diffusion of responsibility, not present in this study. What we were looking for is not there, but still a good study. 5, the longer there is no help, the less influence the model has. And actually, the more likely people are going to leave. And this was probably more particularly true in the black drunk condition. Now, speaking of black drunk, let's have another discussion that's mentioned in the closing thoughts of the PILIAVIN study. They said that there was a study done by Black and Reese in 1967 that showed that white police officers actually don't show much discriminatory or different behavior between white suspects and black suspects. But if you throw alcohol into the mix, and I'll read this verbatim, there was a large increase in prejudice expressed towards drunks of both races, but the increase in prejudice towards black was more than twice that towards whites. So maybe, I don't know, we could all speculate about why this is, but maybe people feel more free to express their racism to somebody who's not fully cognizant of what's being said. I don't know. That's just my guess. Anyway, that you could have your own theory about that. So drunk brings out less altruistic behavior. And actually, let me go back to another result that I forgot to mention before. Only 20% of people moved away from the critical area, but this happened mostly during the drunk condition. They don't want to deal. And maybe they see it as a dangerous situation. Maybe dealing with a drunk person is more likely to get you in some sort of tussle or some sort of unsavory situation. So we're going to talk about 2 reasons why people help or don't help. The first one is called the cost-reward model, also known as the cost-reward matrix. Everything has a cost or a reward. Helping the victim could give you a problem or give you some sort of pat on the back. Not helping the victim, the same thing. So let's break this down more patiently. So the cost-reward matrix is, you could just do it as a simple box, all right, 4-grid box. Helping somebody. If I help, the problem is I may get hurt. But if I help, the reward is I will feel like a pretty good person, a decent person. Hooray me, I'm a wonderful human being. Not helping, the cost is the guilt, perhaps, and the reward is I will not be hurt. Who knows what this guy will do? Maybe he'll have a adverse reaction. Hey man, don't touch me, and maybe he has a switchblade. I don't know. So keep that explanation in mind. And if you want to play the home game with the cost reward matrix, just think about any situation you've been in where you've had to make a decision like this. It doesn't have to be a drunk person on the floor of a subway. It could be something as simple as finding a phone in the middle of a forest. It's still powered on. The person's probably still close by. What would you do? Would you return it? There could be a cost for returning it. Hey man, you stole my phone. Or there could be a reward for returning. Hey man, oh my God, you just saved my life. Here's $20, right? Or you're awesome, getting some sort of praise. And if you keep it, you might feel guilt, but then again, you could sell it on eBay. So everything has a cost reward model when it comes to altruistic behavior. Okay, so that's the first explanation about why people help or do not help. The second explanation is called, I believe, the reduction of arousal theory. And that simply means that when we are in a situation that pumps up our adrenaline, we look for the easiest way to reduce our arousal. Another way of saying this is fight or flight, which is a term we use when we talked about amygdala activation in the Canley study. When we're put in a high intense situation, we either run to solve the problem or run away to get away from the problem. So this is some sort of self-preservation mechanism that we all have. So the reducing arousal theory just simply means that how could I get my adrenaline down as quickly as possible? Do I leave the car or do I help them? I feel anxiety. How do I alleviate that? So that is the second explanation for helping or not helping. And this has been asked about way back in 2009. According to the PILIAVIN, Rodin, and PILIAVIN study, the observation of emergency situation creates arousal which can be or has to be reduced. Suggests two ways in which arousal can be reduced. All right, and here in the answer, they have a quote from the study directly. They talked about the cost-reward matrix. And did I mention a reduction of arousal? Arousal needs to be reduced. Okay. All right, outline the model of response to emergency situations proposed by PILIAVIN. Okay, there are costs of helping, benefits of helping, etc. So it's almost like the same answer, but the second one, it goes into more detail. All right, so it is up for grabs for questioning, so please be aware of those two explanations. All right, let's, as usual, finish with an evaluation using our GRAVE system, which stands for generalizability, reliability, application, validity, and ethics. But actually, I just want to go out of order for a moment because I want to start with application. Why do I want to start here? Partly because as a high school teacher and as a person, I've seen so many incidents in recent days, or years for that matter, that give me some cause for concern. You might have seen, for example, videos posted online of something happening that's atrocious, and somebody's holding a cell phone up to that situation. And to make it even worse, sometimes they're laughing as it's happening. But in some cases, it's just simple diffusion of responsibility. These people really feel more of a sense of obligation to make the incident newsworthy, have a news clip, or to actually stop some sort of terrible thing from happening, perhaps bullying, perhaps mugging, or something like this. So I know in my life, about 7 years ago now, I was in China and I saw a man beating his wife in the middle of the street. And back then I knew no Chinese, so me and my South African friend intervened while most of the other people had their Blackberries out or whatever Nokias back in that time, recording the situation. So I think this is an important application. If you know about things like diffusion of responsibility, or people are less likely to help if more people are around, that's quite important for your own self improvement as a person. But we said before there was no diffusion of responsibility shown in this particular case. But that being said, there were situations where people were less likely to help, such as the black drunk condition, or that it was slower to help drunk people. All right, so I just wanted to get on my little soapbox there and be preach master. Let's go to the proper evaluation. So generalizability, super high, approximately 4,500 participants. Do you need to know 4450? You could, but you could say approximately. I think that would be fine. The reliability, there were controls used. Remember the same posture. He always fell on his back. He always had the same clothing on. He always did it after 70 seconds. Things like that. Application, we just spoke about a little bit, but it could explain also certain phenomenon in society, such as the Kitty Genovese murder. Genovese, excuse me. So it could be used to raise awareness of what to do in public situations. I think the validity is really high. It's a field experiment. It's a real subway. These are people that don't know they're in a study. There can't be any demand characteristics. So I think it's pretty valid. And ethics, we have a problem because they were unsolicited and therefore they were unable to either get consent nor were they able to be debriefed. Okay. All right. Speaking of debriefing and ending things and wrapping things up, let me just say this was a relatively short video, but please don't use it as a substitute for the primary source. You'll always find stuff there that gives you more flavor, if you will. All right. Have a good one. We have one more study to do after this.